And there is an energy in the mother of the great, and I don't mean like a human mother, I mean like the great cosmic mother that needs to be reinstated as the primary power, because this father God is not a man. Like, there is not a father God birthing things. This is a fucking ridiculous. I'm sorry, it is a feminine godhead birthing things because it births. The masculine doesn't birth, and that's just how it is. But we cannot have the experience of existence without the masculine. You need both genders to create the dance of existence.
Hello and welcome to the Word for Women podcast. I'm Christina, your host, and my guests are people who operate at the intersection of science and spirituality. It is my great pleasure today to speak with Arabella Thaïs. Welcome to the show, Arabella.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Dear listeners, currently studying for her PhD in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies, Arabella is a writer, speaker, and trans-disciplinary philosopher who has walked through psychological fire and come out the other side. Committed to the evolution of humanity, her work explores the intersection of poetry, mathematics, beauty, and time, which she teaches at her School of Consciousness and Self-Realization. She uses various aesthetic mediums, such as music, film, and experience design, in order to communicate ideas and propel human transformation. So, Arabella, I was thinking of kicking this off by you sharing a little bit about what sparked this desire to support and accelerate the evolution of humanity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I'm on the path that I'm on due to a spiritual awakening that I experienced in 2017/2018.
Mm-hmm.
And this really was the axial moment upon which my whole life spins, I think, to a degree, because my perception of the world and how I move through the world is in diametric opposition to now and how I experience reality and what I understand to be true. Another way of describing this would be, I was asleep. I had forgotten who I was, where I came from, and I remembered.
Mm-hmm.
I had this awakening. It was very, very, very profound. As I kind of continue on my journey, it seems that what happened to me is quite rare. It could be described as a Kundalini awakening. And it wasn't just like, oh, I had one mystical experience and that shifted it. It was a multitude of divine revelations and non ordinary experiences that started happening quite slowly at the end of 2017 and then picked up momentum and continued throughout the entirety of 2018. So I really had like a year where it felt like I'd taken about 500 micrograms of LSD, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like synchronicities, having profound experiences with number, with maths, getting mathematical downloads about, the number E, the number I, the nature of time, the nature of consciousness. I had also gone from not knowing what my purpose was on this earth and feeling kind of desperately depressed about that and really lost and really, really not wanting to live, if I'm honest with you, to waking up one morning and just knowing with every fiber of my being that I was supposed to do a PhD. And I think we're going to talk about some astrology in this podcast. So this was 1 week. This all happened 1 week into my Saturn returns.
Oh,
Like
wow.
the timing of it is it's just so perfect. So perfect. How 1 week into my Saturn returns, I like start having these experiences and I wake up knowing my true, like my destiny, like my true path. So that's a kind of short version.
That's incredible. So we're talking about this process that seems to have started spontaneously, at least from a human perspective,
Yeah. Yeah.
just as your Saturn return was starting.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned that you had gone from a state of being asleep to being awake, from having forgotten who you are to knowing who you are.
Mm.
Who are you, Arabella?
Well, that's obviously a profound question. It's something I meditate on a lot. The nature of the human psyche is such that its depths are infinite. Each one of us has consciousness within us that goes on infinitely. It's not like you reach a place where you know every facet of yourself, because your mind is the mind of the universe, therefore it has no limits. There is always a deeper dimension to plumb. The further down you go, it's like an inverse relationship. Like the further down you go into the depths of who and what you really are, the higher up you ascend into, into the nature of the universe. Right. So I understand myself then to be a fractal shard of a larger cosmic consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I understand and know deeply that my true essence is much deeper than my physical appearance and my personality traits in this lifetime. However, that said, I don't really subscribe to the Buddhist non self abnegation of personality, individuality. I believe that each one of us, the fact that we display different characteristics, different traits, different texture, and color in terms of our personality does bear, um, or it does reveal something kind of more intrinsic, right, about who and what we are across
Mm-hmm.
lives. So, do you know what I mean? So, I believe in a cohesive identity that traverses across lives and across dimensions, if that makes sense. So, there is something essential about how I show up to reality. For example, I'm an intensely playful person. I'm very playful. I love to laugh. I love to have fun. I love to not take things too seriously. I'm very mischievous. I'm quite naughty. I was expelled from 3 schools. I like to push boundaries. And I think that's not just me in this lifetime. I think that's really fundamental to who and what I am. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a dance between, like, there's a kind of limitless possibility. We're so much more than what we are in this life, and yet there are intrinsic attributes which show us about who and what we are.
Mm-hmm. So all these attributes are connecting our smaller selves, let's say, but they're all an attribute of the higher self, if you will, of each of us.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is that individuality and individual identity is true and real and exists across dimensions. So with that in mind, in terms of the self-exploration, I have been able to identify, like, aspects of how my mind works that is different to how other people's works, right? It's to do with perception, what someone perceives, right? And the lens through which they're experiencing the world. Because if we're each fragments of this larger consciousness, like, how we're experiencing the world is reflective of our intrinsic nature and how we are the universe expressing itself. So I reflect a part of the universe that is deeply aesthetic, because my aesthetic sensibility is very, very acute. It's
Mm-hmm.
very I'm very aesthetically sensitive. Yeah, like I can burst into tears when I behold the moon on a full moon, and not everyone's like that. Do you know what I mean? So, like, that's who I am. I'm very sensitive. I'm very feeling. I'm very intense. I have people say this to me all the time, how intense I am, because compared to their bandwidth of, their emotional sensory bandwidth, I'm feeling, seeing, perceiving perhaps a bit more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like these are aspects of who and what I am. It's such a profound question to ask someone who they are, but I think the key thing is the process of asking. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about coming up with a definitive answer of this is who I am, what I am. It's about asking the question
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And indeed, I appreciate it. It's a huge question to ask.
straight off the bat.
Mm. I think a big part of the reason why I'm asking it is because I have also had experiences that hinted at the fact that I am more than who I am in this body or in this life. Um, and so when you speak about multiple selves across multiple dimensions, I do understand that.
Hmm.
Um, on some level, we might not understand it in the same way, but at least I feel like I'm looking in the same direction as the one you're pointing to, at least roughly. So I definitely do follow that argument, and it's very refreshing to me to hear you speak about individuality. And I think this is what attracts me to that question, because in spiritual discourse we hear a lot about how we are all one,
Yeah.
how we need to be loving towards the collective, which of course we do. However, as an individualist, which is part of my personality, it never fully sat right with me. I felt there was a piece missing. So when you talk about this idea of individuality, the individual self, the attributes that connect us multidimensionally, I feel it speaks to that part that I felt was missing in the broader discourse. So
Mm.
how would you how do you see, you already hinted a little bit at it, I think, but if you were to explain it to someone who's never thought about it this way, about the importance of individuality, how do you reconcile the importance of developing as an individual, not just in this
Hmm.
life, in all our lives,
Hmm.
and this need for more collective consciousness and
Hmm.
this realization that we are in fact all one?
Hmm. Well, we're all one at like the highest level. Do you know what I mean? And the reality is that we are having an experience at a particular dimension, which is a physical dimension when we're in separate bodies and we're having quite, individualized experiences. And the universe wanted that. And I think that's supposed to be embraced, not negated and abnegated, which is why I really don't resonate with a lot of Buddhist teachings. A lot of it I really do resonate with and I think is very profound and important, but I'm not here to transcend. I'm here to embody. And the way I would reconcile these two poles, as you've couched them, is that we are here to self realize. We are here to self realize. That means fully potentiating your individual blueprint. Like, this is what I teach in my school of consciousness, the Temple of Truth, and this course, The Doors of Destiny. I truly believe that each one of us is born with a template, a blueprint, a destiny, right? Much
Mhm.
like a building has an architectural blueprint. And the whole reason and point of being here is to potentiate that, is to become the highest expression of yourself, which will be, particular to you. Like, you are Christina and you have your own individual destiny that is not mine. Now, there might be an overlap insofar as there's a shared mission that pertains to something much bigger than us and that is collective and unitive, but you will be doing things that only you can express. And that's the beauty of it, right? We're not like, we haven't ascended our physical bodies and we're not in some sort of monadic light structure floating around the ether. Maybe that's what happens at a higher level. I think it does. But the way I see it is very much through the lens of David Bohm, who's a quantum physicist. He's dead now, but um, I absolutely love him. He spoke about the process of cosmic personalization. And
Mhm.
so he also believed that the universe had a kind of personality, if you will. Like, as far as I'm concerned, it must do. It must, because it's all of us. And we have personalities. And if reality is fractal, which it is, it's actually like quite logical reasoning that if we have a personality, then that means the universe also at some level has a kind of personality. It's just that it integrates every single thing in existence, and it's the totality of all these different individual components come to form one whole. So
Mhm.
it is paradoxical to the linear mind, to the mind that finds apparent oppositions difficult to reconcile. I don't find paradox particularly difficult to get my head around. So for me, it makes perfect sense. But does that answer your question?
Yes, and I think this brings us beautifully to the new academic discipline that you're proposing, that cosmology.
Hmm.
Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So I propose a new hybrid academic discipline, which I call depth cosmology, which is drawn from depth psychology, as put forward by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung towards the beginning of the 20th century, whereby the human psyche for the first time ever was understood to have an unconscious, like to have a deeper level. Hence it's called depth psychology. So I'm really inspired by like the approach that these two psychologists, I mean, especially Jung, really, the approach that Jung had towards the psyche is what I propose we adopt and apply to the cosmos, founded on the principle axiom that if the universe is a mind, the universe is mental, which it is, then we must treat it accordingly. Then we must
Mm-hmm.
treat it like one and not treat it as inert matter that's mechanical and void of intelligence and spirit. We must treat it the same way that we look at the human psyche. So depth psychology, what is that doing? Okay, Jung was studying dreams, like dream analysis, symbol, metaphor, like all of these things, archetypes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just transfer that and apply that to the cosmos, whereby you understand the cosmos too has there's the archetypes are embedded in the cosmos. They're not just in human consciousness, the whole universe is pure consciousness. So these archetypal patterns and forms and entities that reveal themselves through our lived experience are actually intrinsic properties of the universe. I believe them to be divine beings, like
Mm-hmm.
really, like they're actual entities that are alive. They are like these, they are these kind of divine beings to an extent. Beyond this, I propose depth cosmology as a new hybrid discipline. So it's a synthesis of various disciplines and the depth psychology doesn't go this far. So this is like depth cosmology is it's a whole new level whereby we understand that physics must not be extricated from philosophy, and indeed poetry, poetics, aesthetics, cultural history, mythology, um, astrology. Yeah, like all of these different disciplines converge, because if reality is all one, then it means there's a unitive point whereby everything intersects and everything highlights and amplifies and enhances everything else. So imagine astrology being studied under the lens of physics and black holes and
Mm-hmm.
quantum mechanics, mathematical architecture, temporality and time, also poetry, like the poetry of the shapes of the actual shape that the planetary orbits arc out in the sky, and the fact that that pertains directly to archetypal patterns in our lives. If that's not beautiful, I don't know what is. Do you understand? Like, and then that obviously applies to mythology. It's just all connected, and we need to start accepting that and studying it in an appropriate fashion.
Mm-hmm. So here's what I hear. All these disciplines are angles through which we're looking at the same thing, our world, in essence. And we see different things from different angles. It's like that story of the elephant and the blindfolded people. Someone feels the tail, they think it's a rope. Someone feels the leg, they think it's a tree stump, but no one actually figures out that it's an elephant unless they corroborate and they say, I feel
Mhm.
this, I see this, I sense this. Oh,
Mhm.
it's an elephant.
Mm.
Otherwise, they're not going to reach, right? Does that resonate
Yeah.
with the argument? Okay.
Yeah.
So what I adore about what you put forward is, again, it addresses one of the main frustrations that I've had when it comes to the way we relate to knowledge creation, because we do tend to put things such as physics, mathematics, things that are supported by the materialist paradigm, let's say, or that makes sense within the materialist paradigm, we tend to elevate them, as I think, as society, at least in Western societies, let's say, above art, beauty, the softer, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
ways of looking at the world. And what you say is no, 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 no. It all is one. These are all just ways of looking at one, but we need them all and they're all the same, really.
Yeah.
It's just the way that we've artificially partitioned them.
Yes, I think to an extent that's true. I think the thing is like you can't say that studying black holes is the same as mythology necessarily, or rather that it's looking at the same thing from a different angle.
Hmm.
Um, Let me think about this. There's something emergent that comes from when you put them all together. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
There's something
Yes.
emergent that comes that's beyond, it's greater than the sum of its parts.
Hmm.
I think that's what I'm trying to say. Whereas the elephant in the analogy you used isn't greater than the sum of its parts. It's not.
Hmm.
It's more that they're touching the same thing and they don't know what it is. But I think there's actually something else. Does that make sense?
It's qualitatively different
Yeah.
than.
Yeah,
I,
it's more that
I follow.
because there's such different disciplines, and mythology can be seen, it can be seen within a hermetically sealed box and applied in a certain
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
And same as kind of particle physics and stuff. And really, this is depth cosmology. At the heart of it is has to be cosmology. That is the kind of primary thing here. They're
Hmm.
not all equal, if you will. That has to be the nuts and bolts of it. Has to be
Hmm.
physics. It has to be the study of the universe at a very scientific level.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then it's more that, like, okay, now start understand that it's a mind. I think that's the principal, like, axiom of it is that the universe is a mind and it should be treated accordingly. Right? Because it's not like you can look at mythology and then apply that to psychology and stuff. But it's more about acknowledging that as everything is consciousness, all the aspects that pertain to consciousness. So that's why things like cultural history, because it's studying human behavior and cultural expression, mythology, these are our stories, that they are all intimately connected and bear relevance on each other, but only that it only matters when it's applied to physics.
Hmm.
Because if you do you know what I mean? It only matters there. Like there is a hierarchy here of value.
Hmm.
What I would say though is that I think if I had to choose, like, if I had to choose just three disciplines that I see as kind of equally as important, like the triadic kind of core of depth cosmology would be philosophy, physics, and poetry.
Hmm.
Within physics, obviously, includes like there's mathematics included within that. So I see
Hmm.
them as all like epistemologically necessary um, to to really get to the truth. And I believe that poetry offers potentially an equally valid epistemological kind of pathway to discover truth, but you'd need to apply like mathematical methodologies, other kind of methodologies to the literature to start unraveling it in a way that is
Hmm.
scientific or bears
Hmm.
scientific relevance to the nature of the universe. I know that's quite abstract. I can deconstruct that.
So still have a methodology, not just employ the notions indiscriminately.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we will need novel methodologies
Hmm. Hmm.
because the current instruments we use in physics are not really sufficient because they're just looking at a tiny like bandwidth of perceivable data um,
Hmm.
as architected through instruments we've designed. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's like there's this whole entity out there which is the universe of which we're a part, and 96% of it we can't even see. We don't even know what it
Hmm.
is. They just say it's dark energy, dark matter. It's just so childish at this point to even keep saying that when there's no supporting evidence really. It's just a hypothesis that's deployed to support the standard model of Big Bang cosmology. So what I'm saying, it's like Okay, let's accept that that's not sufficient. We need to evolve this. And then something like poetry, that doesn't take us forward really, other than the fact that, like, beautiful poetry does convey truth, and that in itself is meaningful. And I don't just mean truth about the human condition, I mean like the superlative aesthetic experience, like, tells us something fundamental about the nature of the universe that we experience beauty. But for example, when you start applying different, like, novel mathematical methodologies to literature, what it reveals is hidden patterns. So this is
Mm.
integral to my thesis. So about, when was it, 2016, there was an experiment run by the Polish Institute of Nuclear Physics, which discovered that in certain bodies of literature, um there are fractals, like fractal patterns and multifractal patterns, like near perfect multifractals.
Mm.
Okay, and the literary works they discovered this in were works like Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, The Waves by Virginia Woolf, all literary works that are extremely abstract, extremely poetic, and explore the nature of time, mind, and consciousness, right? And I just
Mm.
don't, it cannot be a coincidence. Like, I see this and I'm like, well, this is fucking obvious. This is proof that these writers are downloading, if you will, their consciousness is in training with something mathematical.
Mm.
So it's showing you that consciousness is mathematical. There's,
Mm.
there's mathematical architecture embedded into language, into meaning, into story, and it is percolated through consciousness. Now, when these writers were writing these works, the word fractal didn't even exist, right? Also, aside from that, there's no way you could encode multifractals into a work. Like, even if you try to do it intentionally, you couldn't. So, do you see what I'm saying? I'm really encouraging, like, methodologies like that to be taken further, to be advanced, and for there to be an interdisciplinary dialogue between primarily philosophy, poetry, and physics. But of course, there are other disciplines that are really relevant.
Mm.
Does that make sense? I know this is, like, it's quite complex, I suppose, in a way.
It is complex, and I think you're doing a brilliant job of explaining it. So, even though personally, for example, for me, physics is often above my pay grade. I'm a research psychologist, right? That's more of my field. But the way you explain it, I understand that there's, first of all these patterns, right? Because of the cosmic one mind we have,
Mm.
like you spoke to archetypes, you spoke to teams. There's these things that exist that are reflected at different levels, and we can perceive them as well from our level, even though they might be reflective of some more cosmic, you know, systems, if you
Yeah.
will. Um, and that's where systems like astrology might come in, and we can go into that as well. Um, and so I think, to me, one of the key takeaways is there are, because of this truth being the same and revealed at multiple levels in this way, there
Mm.
are multiple ways of accessing truth. So
Mm.
as you say, the truth that a physicist finds, like you can come across that through pursuing beauty, through language, through poetry as well, because the patterns are there. It's just a different way of climbing the same mountain.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different path, right?
Yeah.
Would that be an appropriate visual? But it's the same mountain.
Yeah. Although I would say that like, what physicists are currently doing, they're not really getting closer to truth at this point. They're just ascertaining some information that is nowhere near as truthful as listening to a Beethoven quartet.
Hmm.
It's not truth. It's not truth with a capital T. It's just like, it's some facts. It's some, how do I explain this? Because the paradigm of standard Big Bang cosmology is so limited, any facts that they have about the universe, about stellar movement and stuff, it's such a hermetically sealed box. It's so devoid of spirit. It's devoid of consciousness. So frankly, anything that is presented by physicists that doesn't now talk about, include, refer to consciousness, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of redundant. It's just like,
Mhm.
guys, grow up, evolve, move on. Like, we need to start looking at the bigger picture. Poetry is pertaining to consciousness because it's human consciousness. So even though it might not be very useful for us scientifically, it still is much closer to truth on that mountain. It's far more elevated.
Mhm. Do you get any pushback from physicists when proposing that cosmology?
Well, I haven't really gone at this with a mainstream physicist yet, but I would. The only pushback I've had, because this is basically the only encounter I've had with someone so mainstream, was Richard Dawkins at a
Mhm.
festival.
Oh.
Yeah, at a festival. I was in the audience and he was doing a talk, and at the end they opened the Q&A up to the audience. I don't think he was really expecting someone like me to stand up and deconstruct his entire argument, and and use sort of science and whatever. Like, I was quoting some great minds, scientific minds, to deconstruct his argument, and his retort was, and it was so like unacceptable, the only comeback he had was, well, for me to reply to you, I'd have to quote someone like Deepak Chopra. It was just so disparaging the way that he said
Mm.
it. I was like and I wasn't allowed to speak back because I wasn't on a panel with him. I was actually just supposed to be asking him quite a simple question. And I wasn't asking him a question at all. I was taking him down. But, he couldn't even really grapple with my argument because his paradigm is so set in stone that for him to grapple with my argument would mean possibly that 60 years worth of research, his whole identity would just crumble, which is a lot for people. It's like, think about someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson or any of these famous, or who else? Sean Carroll, I want to say. He's quite a famous physicist, talks about quantum mechanics. I read, well, I didn't read the whole book, but I read part of this book he wrote. And he was so adamant in this book that we should not include consciousness in quantum mechanics. We should not acknowledge the pivotal role that consciousness plays. He's like, this is, don't go there. This is nonsense. And I think for me, this paradigm is just, it's so outdated that, yeah, any mainstream scientist that I took this to is going to have a problem with it. And in fact, because I'm not a
Mhm.
classically trained physicist, and I'm a woman, and I'm 34, and that does
Mhm.
matter because this is a society in which we live. It's still a patriarchy. I'd
Mhm.
get dismissed out of hand. Luckily, I'm a warrior and I would take them the fuck down. Excuse my language. I would, though.
That's no excuses needed,
But
Arabella.
I don't know sort of how PG your podcast is, but I can swear
You're
quite
good.
a lot.
You're good.
But so I would have full confidence that if I were actually allowed up on a stage with some of these people, I have enough information that I could take them down. But there would be a fight. There would be a fight.
Well, I think it's perfectly expected that you got pushback. I think if you so wish, um, I would like to see you on a panel with Richard Dawkins, with mainstream scientists. I would like to see that debate because I agree with you. It's coming from this post-materialist paradigm presenting in a certain way. And yes, being a woman, given the history of women in science and how we have been treated and outright excluded throughout science, these things do matter. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you bring forth these ideas. Um,
Mhm.
as a woman, as someone who's had a spiritual awakening, as someone who's basically been excluded from these discussions, right,
Yeah.
for centuries, it's no wonder you have a different perspective. The perspective was never there to
Mhm.
start with.
Mhm.
So I think, thank you for sharing that. I think this is brilliant. And sometimes I do wonder because so my spiritual awakening has been around the same time as you. So it was
Hmm.
later a bit, late 2018. I am 32 though, so actually we might have had it around the same time age-wise, Saturn return.
Hmm.
And it took a while. It took a while to settle like into a new paradigm, to see the world in a different way. Like I'm aware I see things very differently now than I would have seen them in 2017, right? But then I think, well, I only went public with this once I was comfortable. I didn't have, yes, I had an attachment to that quote unquote scientific persona, but not in terms of mainstream science, but not that strong. But if you do build a career for 30, 40, 60 years on a certain set of assumptions,
Mm,
right? We're talking about materialist assumptions.
mm.
Even if you change your mind in private,
Yeah,
what is
exactly.
the cost of coming forward with that? Would you even
Yeah.
do it?
Well, I think you basically have to be prepared to undergo an ego death.
Hmm.
It's an ego death is the cost of it, because you're basically, and that would require so much courage and so much humility to be like, hey, I think there might be something more going on here, and that's not
Mhm.
outside the realm of possibility. It's just that the ego is not going to do that, is it? Because it's attached. It's the ego is attached to a particular identity wherein it gets its power, right? And we all have an ego, and men of a certain age, when within materialist science, probably gonna have it a bit more, because that's their whole life is built on a paradigm. That's not the case for most
Mm,
people, that their whole identity is built on a paradigm, like outwardly how they're expressing to the world. Do you know what I mean?
mhm, yeah,
Like publicly, Richard Dawkins is a very public materialist scientist. Actually, the question I
mhm.
did ask him, because the woman who was sort of moderating was like, "Do you have a question for Professor Dawkins?" I was like, "Okay, fine." And my question was, "Would you ever consider changing your mind? Would you just consider it?" And his straight
Mhm.
up no. He's closed-minded.
Well,
So I think it says quite a lot about him as a person. Like, I have respect for
mhm.
him as an academic, but he's got a closed mind. No one should have a closed mind. I don't have a closed mind. I don't know, really. Like, I think I know things, and then I don't really know, though. I'm just a human being. And more is revealed to you over time. And more is revealed to you the more humble you are, the more open you are, and more receptive you are, then the more the universe is able to show you.
I wholeheartedly agree. You raise an excellent point, and I would pose the same question, and I do, to non-materialists. What would it take for you to change your mind, or would you ever consider changing your mind? The way you put it, I think this is really important, because otherwise, what we're going to end up doing is just build a new dogma, replace the old one, put the new one in, and it's
Hmm.
the same story, just with different starting assumptions and whatnot. So I'm not on board with that
Yeah.
personally. So we do
Yeah.
have to keep that in mind. I think that's the shadow side of any sort of knowledge seeking, right? You have to be willing to just throw it all in the fire and be willing to say I was wrong
Hmm. I agree.
at any stage. Awesome. So since we have touched on patriarchy, let's chat a little bit about that. So, you are an advocate for matriarchy, and I thought this would be a very interesting discussion for us to have. Like, first of all, I want to hear your thoughts. I'm very keen to share some of mine as well. But first of all,
Hmm.
how do you define matriarchy? I know you tie it in with anarchy as well. So, how does all that look?
Yeah, thank you. I think when people hear the word matriarchy, I think often the assumption is that it's just an inverse reflection, or like it's like the kind of polar opposite of patriarchy. So I like it's the
Mm,
same, it's just that women are the leaders, women are the dominant sex. Now, that's really not what it is at all, because the fundamental nature of women is we aren't dominant. Like we don't dominate. It's not in our nature, because we have wombs, we give birth, we child rear, as in that doesn't mean you need to be defined by that, but women biologically have this impulse, and we don't rape people, we don't rape men. That's just not something that we do or can do or are inclined to do, because biologically we receive in our body, right? To engage in intercourse for a woman with a man, she is allowing and receiving penetration in her body. This requires surrender, okay? It's not a dominating thing to do. So because of that, there is an intrinsic impulse in the feminine to not dominate. As a result, women rarely instigate wars or engage in the sorts of behavior that patriarchy does, right? Which is basically raping, pillaging, conquering, and is predicated, like patriarchy is predicated on a hierarchical system, top down system of governance, right? Where it's like there are subordinates. So matriarchy is none of those things. And I quickly want to just address something I said, which is that women don't start wars. Because when I've said that, then inevitably someone will message me and be like, oh, Margaret Thatcher, Elizabeth I. And it's like, dude, these were patriarchs in women's bodies. Okay. Like, do you know what I mean? This was not the feminine leading. This is just a woman, like a woman's body, but a patriarchal system operating through a woman's body. Like Elizabeth I, for example, she had to remain the virgin queen. She wasn't even allowed, well, she chose not to get married, because if she got married, she would no longer lead because of patriarchy. So she had to go by this, the appellation of the Virgin Queen, and pretend sort of to be a virgin. Is that matriarchy? No. Is that empowerment? No. She was playing the game she had to play in order to survive, right? Um,
Mm.
Matriarchy as a system of governance is really utilizing the feminine principles I've outlined, which is nurturing, collaborative, um, it's compassionate, it's maternal as a principle. It's really utilizing that energy, and therefore spreading power out laterally as opposed to vertically. So
Mm.
it's more like looking at a system as an interconnected nexus, whereby everyone has different roles but it's equal. And so the leadership is a very new paradigm model of leadership. If you actually look at the word matriarchy, so obviously the mater bit at the beginning, mater refers to mother, and then archy refers to the beginning or the first cause. That's what it means in Greek. So matriarchy is just about acknowledging that the feminine is the first cause. Babies come out of maternal bodies. Women grow babies in their bodies. Even if a woman doesn't have children, she still has that technology in her body. She has a womb. So women are plugged in to a deeper level of intelligence than men. Women have power that men don't have, and that is the beginning and the end of it. We have power that men don't have. Men have power that we don't have. Men are physically stronger than us. There's no like arguing with that. They are. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful that they have that power and then we have our power. It just so happens that the power that women have bears the technology of the Big Bang. Like you literally have the technology of the Big Bang in your body. That's what happens when a sperm meets the egg. There's a flash of light, boom, and it's a micro Big Bang, right? We then grow a human in our body and give birth to it. Now, when a woman gives birth, that that for me is the most yang, the most intense expression of yang possible, right? Like it's like within the deepest part of the yin is the yang, within the deepest part of the yang is the yin. So what I believe needs to like step into a position of power and governance now is that yang within the yin. So the fire within women that allows them to give birth and that makes them fierce protectors. Like most women, if they
Mhm.
have kids, will sacrifice themselves for their children. Do you know what I mean? This is the kind of primordial impulse. I
Mm.
feel like that level of fierceness, of like non-fuckable withness, combined with the soft, loving, maternal nurturer is what needs to lead. And it's not just about the feminine leading in a way that, like, you know, because a lot of new paradigm thinkers, they get really triggered by the idea of women, like women leading. They're like, no, no, it should be 50-50. It's about the divine feminine. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I'm kind of sick of seeing men up on a stage as leaders. Like they've had their time. They've had their time and they fucked it up big time. Now just let women take over, sit down, be quiet, let us lead, and we will give you unimaginable ecstasy in return. And what I would like from men is for them to lead by protecting us, creating safety for us so that we can express. Again, the nature of the feminine is not dominant. So I don't want to domineer a man. I don't want to dominate a man into submission. That's not very attractive at all. I just want the power of like this great cosmic mother energy to be like front and center, forward facing leadership. That was a very long winded answer to your question, but
No, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that because I think so. When I was preparing for this interview, um, I was like, you know what? What's the actual definition of a matriarchy? And I just went very classically on Wikipedia. Don't though I don't love it for post-materialist topics because of the reasons we all know. We get a little bit censored, but I was like matriarchy. That's a topic I can probably find something on. No definition consensus whatsoever.
mm,
Was it inheritance through like the mother's line?
mm,
Is it like, leadership by women? It wasn't clear at all. It was like this mishmash. People don't even agree if examples of matriarchy really exist or existed or what.
yeah,
So it's a mess. So that's why I wanted to kick this discussion off with, what do you mean by matriarchy? Because I feel like it's so easy to speak at each other and not
yeah,
talk about the same thing. So I would love to pick some of the things that you mentioned
hmm,
and just pull on those threads a little bit. I'm really curious what your thoughts are. Um, so as a disclaimer, personally, I am in that 50-50 camp that you were describing. So I
yeah,
am of the opinion, well, I don't really see um, a governance system of women leading. I see it more not necessarily as 50-50, but a flat hierarchy, let's say, more egalitarian vibes.
yeah,
The reason I say this is because, for example, when you talk about women and the feminine principle, like sometimes I wonder like how much we can truly overlap them. Because in my experience, like I've seen women holding masculine power, feminine power in healthy ways and toxic, toxic AF ways, So I have seen women dominating. I agree with you that they reproduce these patriarchal notions. And at the same time, I have seen that happen. So for me, I'm personally not comfortable with generalizing the nurturing traits to all women. I agree with you that gender wise, there's a tendency to certain attributes, like we were talking about earlier. So I think archetypally, we have those tendencies there. That's my personal belief based on what I've known, what I've seen. I don't think it applies to everyone. I think there's always exceptions and just people who live in very different ways. You gave historic examples as well. Um, so what I think I'm a little bit wary of is because we have had patriarchy for so long, like, well, 5,000 years,
mm-hmm,
an insanely long amount of time, right?
mm-hmm,
Like, we are all a little bit messed up right now, regardless of gender. But women, admittedly, we had it the worst throughout history. So I'm thinking from this hurt perspective, if we might be a little bit too tempted by that. It's our turn now. Let's do this. I kind of like the same way I was talking earlier about replacing one dogma with another. And I know you addressed this at the beginning of your argument that matriarchy is not patriarchy reversed. I
Yeah.
am,
Well,
however,
it's really
wondering
not
if,
though.
if we start on the right foot by saying, let's put women in charge. Do you know what I mean?
Um, y- yeah, I do, but I think if you really, well, not if you really understood what I'm saying. I think it's our turn now. I'm coming at that from a much higher frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You've got to understand that I'm not coming at this from like a tit for tat thing. I'm coming
Mm-hmm.
at it I'm talking about correcting. I'm talking about reinstating what is correct and what is, I believe, to be aligned with the fundamental nature of the universe, which is that the feminine comes first. This is my perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like, oh, okay, yeah, you had your go, and now it's our turn in like a childish way. What I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
is, okay, that happened, like that happened. That should never have happened, but it did, and it got way out of control. And now we're going to take the reins again. Don't worry about it, but we've got this because the feminine is the governing principle, because the feminine is the originator of worlds. The feminine is the originator of worlds. Matter, mother. It's a maternal body. It's a cosmic womb. Again, this is my belief.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not needing everyone to agree with me. It's just that a stance that I believe wholeheartedly. I don't want to see half men and half women standing up on a stage leading. I don't. I want to see 80% women and 20% men. And I want
Mm-hmm.
men to be leading from behind. I want them to
Mm-hmm.
also be leaders from behind.
Mhm,
For example, someone like Joe Rogan, for me, is a perfect example of a male leader. He is creating a space and a platform to elevate, right?
mhm,
But he is not necessarily at the forefront, front and center stage himself, right? I would like more men standing up and talking about the plight of women and teaching other men how to treat women. Like that's what I would like to see more of. And I would like to see more like trans and female bodies, like more like androgynous and gender fluid and actual feminine bodies up on stages, representing this vital cosmic force that is the great cosmic
mhm,
mother. And men can't do that because they're not in our bodies. They're not in our bodies, and they don't
mhm,
carry the power in their body. And I think that's what it comes down to. They will never be as plugged into the universe as women because they don't have a womb. They're not bleeding cyclically with the rhythm, of the lunar cycle. That's what I believe. It's like high priestess energies, not high priests and high priestesses, high priestesses. I really,
mhm,
really believe this is that, one of the most utopian societies we had was matriarchy in ancient Crete. We know it was a near golden age situation because women were leading. And when women lead, they don't dominate. They say, here, hold our hand equally, but let us sort of lead. Does that make sense? It's very triggering what I'm saying for a lot of people. I
no,
acknowledge that.
it it does make sense, and I feel your conviction in it and your love in it. I sense your love, and even though, and it triggers a part of me as well. I don't know what the right answer is.
Mhm.
I want to hear your perspective, and I push back where I feel that from my angle things maybe don't click, but this is not to say that I want to put your perspective down in any way. Please don't understand that. I do want to hear
Yeah,
your
no, I
perspective.
don't.
I do want
It's
to.
it's a perspective, and you have your perspective, and I respect and appreciate everyone's right to have a perspective that's theirs. What I'm doing as an academic is trying to persuade you.
Mhm,
I'm trying to persuade you.
mhm. Absolutely. Go for
And
it.
that's what debate is, isn't it? That's what a debate is that people get up
Absolutely.
and they make their case, right? Like a lawyer. They get up and they're like, here is my argument, and they're passionate. It's like the ancient world, the speaker's rhetoric is, I have to believe 1,000,000% in what I'm saying, and I want to try and persuade you. And if I don't
Mm-hmm.
persuade you, then I'm failing in presenting my argument, perhaps. But then also people come to life with their own sets of experience, beliefs, feelings, individual identity, and that's the beauty of it, is that you have a right to believe and feel the way you want to feel, and it's neither right nor wrong. It's not about being right or wrong. I believe that what I'm saying is true, but it doesn't mean that you're wrong or I'm wrong. It's not about that.
I think that's embodying new paradigm energy, what you just said.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when I say this, because again, it's a frequency, it's not even about the words one is using, it's about the frequency with which they're delivered. People just hear words and they get triggered because what they think what I'm saying is that men no longer have a place or a role and they're subordinate. And that's not what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying at all. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think also some men, frankly, are scared that we're going to do to them what they did to us. Actually, I really do. There's
Possibly.
that as well, which we wouldn't, because we couldn't and we don't do that. Um, but yeah, it's very much about. I think it's a kind of like surrender. I think what I'm really asking of men is to just surrender and let go. The way that women are so good at surrendering in sex, because you have to. You have to surrender when you have sex as a woman. Do you not? I mean,
Yeah. So you're asking, so correct me if I'm wrong. You're asking men to embrace more of the yin energy and you're asking women to embrace more of the yang.
uh, yeah. Yeah, which is why when I say women are nurturers, we are, because that's the maternal impulse, is to nurture. I mean that
Mhm.
that's really non-negotiable. The maternal impulse is
Mhm.
nurturing.
Mhm.
However, I am not an advocate for the notion that the feminine, like a kind of binary position of the feminine is soft and the masculine is like forward driving. I don't believe that at all. Look at Carly
Mhm.
energy. Look at Carly. Well,
Mhm.
she's fucking she she's got a decapitated head in her hand with her tongue out, like breathing fire. That is not soft energy. That is the feminine that creates and destroys worlds. That's what I'm talking about. This great cosmic mother. It's the Mahadevi. My belief system is not new. It's very ancient. It's called Shaktiism. It's called
Mhm.
Shaktiism. It's classical tantra. I believe that the fundamental metaphysical principle is feminine. It's a tridevi. It's a three,
Mhm.
the goddess. It's a goddess. And she creates out of her the masculine. I very much see the masculine as a kind of child of the feminine, great cosmic mother, which she created to differentiate herself so she could experience herself. I handed in a paper not so long ago to my supervisor making this case, and he got super triggered by it as well. It's okay. That's his right. That's his right to not, agree with everything I was saying. I kept pushing at him though, and he was like, okay,
Mhm.
maybe I do just need to submerge myself in her chaotic waters. I was like, yeah, you do. Tiamat. It's Tiamat. It's the Babylonian mother goddess.
Something you said really, like jumped at me just
All right.
now. You talk about the masculine emerging from the feminine.
Yeah.
If you look in Christian tradition, it's the other way around.
Okay.
The feminine emerging from the masculine, Eve emerging from Adam's rib.
Yeah. Because they inverted it, they bastardized it and distorted the fundamental geometry. So patriarchy did. They
Interesting.
took the
Mhm.
truth and they inverted it. That's why when I say I'm here to correct this aberration, it's not about tit for tat. It's about yeah, it's about correcting a mistake.
I really appreciate you sharing this. As I said, I couldn't find a lot of straight information on matriarchy. I'm not quite of the same school of thought, I think, as you on this, and I think that's what makes for a good discussion
Sure.
because we get to throw things back and forth. So I was wondering, let me just quickly go through my notes.
Yeah, no worries. By the way, my stance is a minority stance. Like,
So
and
is post-materialism.
well, exactly, but especially with matriarchy, it just triggers people so much. I think there's a lot of fear when they hear the word, and probably what I'm saying is going to trigger your listeners, but I think triggering people's good.
I think
Triggering's
so too.
good.
I was just about to say that triggering people is good. I think it's this is where growth will happen. It doesn't
Exactly.
mean that anyone listening to this might not agree with you or with me. They might have their own
Yeah,
stance.
exactly, which is fine. And that's totally fine, you know? We don't all need to agree with each other. I mean, how boring would that be?
Incredibly. I feel like as we're discussing this, my fear is that we're conflating the words feminine and women and masculine and men, whereas we're
Mhm.
talking about these primordial energies that kind of like swirl in all of us in different
Sure.
proportions. So, how do we reconcile that with this whole discussion about matriarchy, about gender roles, about all of this?
Well, I think, look, and again, this is not like a simple topic, it's really multifaceted. What I do want to emphasize is the role of archetypes
Hmm.
and that it's not binary. It's not like the feminine is this and the masculine is this. Because some people have said to me, you have a lot of masculine energy. I'm like, not really, actually. I'm intensely feminine. I just have like a badass warrior energy. Like I have like the female assassin energy. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? And that's an archetype of the feminine,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
again, I want to say that it's not binary. As I alluded to when I referred to Margaret Thatcher and Elizabeth First, it's not like, oh, you're in a female body, therefore you're going to show up with these attributes. No. You know, you mustn't underestimate the effect of living in patriarchy for 5,000 years, what that's going to
Hmm.
do to you, how that's going to shape you in order to survive in this world,
Hmm.
right? But I think there is a relationship between your biological expression, specifically because of women, because we bleed and have wombs, and how that connects you, like how that connects you to the world, you know. And same with men. But of course, at the end of the day, it's all one mind. It's all one mind. So there is no separation really. We are equal. Like we cannot have the masculine without the feminine. We cannot have the feminine without the masculine. They're completely equal. I think that's also really, really key to
Hmm.
emphasize is this is not hierarchical. It's archetypal and it's mental. And people, whether they're in a man's body or a woman's body or they're in a trans body, are going to be showing up to reality with their own archetypal signatures,
Hmm.
right? But it's more about tuning in to how these archetypes express themselves through the lens of gender and what that really means. And for me, it comes down to the fact that you know, humans come out of female bodies, right? The mother is the first principle, and there is an energy in the mother of the great, and I don't mean like a human mother, I mean like the great cosmic mother, that needs to be reinstated as the primary power,
Hmm.
because this father god is not a man. Like there is not a father god birthing things. This is a fucking
Right.
ridiculous. I'm sorry, it is a feminine godhead birthing things, because it births. The masculine doesn't birth, and that's just how it is. But we cannot have the experience of existence without the masculine. You need both genders to create the dance of existence. So it's like the feminine, I see it as like the feminine birthed the masculine and seeded herself with the masculine and then began the
Hmm.
dance of existence. That's how I see it.
I think that's a beautiful way um to conclude that, and there's still a million directions I could take this in, but I'm mindful of the time, and there's another topic that I think our listeners will love, and I would love to go into it with you. And it shoots off from the archetype discussion because you argue that astrology, and as you've alluded earlier in the interview as well, astrology is a science. Tell us about that. How do we get there?
Yeah. So, well, it's an art and a science, isn't it? It's definitely not like a hard science in the way that molecular biology is a hard science.
Mm-hmm.
But what I mean when I say that it's a science is that it's not like it's not what a materialist scientist would say it is, which is basically a kind of a silly pseudo magical thinking sort of enterprise. It pertains to planetary movements. It pertains to physics because it pertains to the flow of entropy, right? Which is the movement of the planets going around the sun through time. That's entropy, it's physics, it's cosmology. It's just that astrology is looking at stellar pattern, stellar movement, and planetary movement through an archetypal lens. That's all that it is. Now, to come back to depth cosmology, if we accept that the universe is a mind and we accept that archetypes are real entities,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, now astrology is an integral scientific, like it's an integral component of this new scientific enterprise, whereby the archetypes, the nature of the archetypes, and how they correspond to consciousness and how consciousness operates at various levels across the universe. Astrology is an incredible window now into the workings and the nature of consciousness at scale. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how I would couch it as a science.
Mm-hmm. I've I found that really interesting, but that's, the funny thing is, this sort of angle that astrology is a science was one of the little steps, because I while ago I stumbled upon this, like, upon this Instagram post that basically argued the same thing, and I was like, huh, interesting. And it was one of those little stepping stones that eventually got to me actually getting a reading, which was a complex thing because I didn't have my exact birth time. It was a whole thing. But after looking over the whole chart, understanding that it's way more complex than we know whatever pop magazines would have you believe, I was like, oh my God, like these themes, like these patterns throughout my life, like things that have been very active, like it was literally there, like discussing, like, with the astrologer that was helping me the interpretations. And I was like, this is insane. There must be, there's something to this, right? But then again, if you go back to that materialist science angle that you were discussing, it's like, well,
Hmm.
this is nonsensical because it's completely disconnected
Yeah.
from who we are, except
Yeah.
it's not in the paradigm that you're proposing.
Yeah. No, in the
Mm-hmm.
paradigm I'm proposing, it's fundamental because it sheds light on consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and it also reveals how mathematical patterns correlate with consciousness too, because
Mm-hmm.
the planets create, like, it's like sacred geometry. If you look at like the rose of Venus, for example, the shape of Venus as it goes around and the Earth as they orbit around the sun, I mean, this is like profound sacred geometry. I just think it's incredibly fascinating and interesting and demanding of further investigation that we've got these planets in space that for whatever reasons bear an archetypal signature, yeah, and that live themselves through us in our lives according to their, the timing of their transits and how that's chiming with our natal chart, so our like hymn sheet, if you will, of music, and are arcing out like perfect sacred geometric patterns in the sky. I just think it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary and not to be ignored. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Richard Tarnas, but I
Okay.
mean, he's probably the most, I would argue, he would, he's so humble, he'd probably be quite bashful if I, heard me say this, but I think he's probably the most important astrologer alive today because of the work he's done on cultural history. He's a philosopher and a cultural historian and an astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
And he started my program, Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
like, and he wrote this book called Cosmos and Psyche. So he over the course of, like, I don't know, almost 2,000 pages, basically breaks down the patterns between events and behavior and situations on the planet with the um, planetary transits and the planetary aspects. So, like, this is what happens when the Jupiter Uranus
Mm-hmm.
conjunction, which we just had actually, happens every
Mm-hmm.
14 years. Every time it comes, there's like there's like a wave of creativity and innovation, and he shows like how this is happening and how accurate it is. Another thing that Richard does is he describes archetypes as waveforms. So the planets actually
Hmm.
correspond to a sort of quantum waveform, an archetypal energetic waveform, which makes sense because everything's a wave, isn't it? Everything's a wave. Like we know that from quantum mechanics, everything is a wave.
It's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it will motivate our listeners to look into his work and to look into astrology more generally if you
Yeah.
haven't already. I think both Arabella and myself recommend that highly. Um, I think the last question, Arabella, and it's something that's been on my mind since the beginning of this interview. Tell me about the painting behind you. So, and if you can describe it a bit for the
That
audio only
one, this
listeners.
one.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God, Kim's going to be so. I'll just do that. I know you probably. I'm just going to move my microphone just so you can see it. Um, so my best friend painted that uh for
It's
me.
beautiful.
I commissioned her to do a portrait of me because she paints women in this style, like fine line. She does fine line drawing and then paints. And she uses a lot of symbol and sort of metaphorical devices to express. And so that's me. You can see me in my tattoo. There's the unilome, which is that spiral of like enlightenment. There's like a space galactic cat in there as well.
Hmm.
I don't know if you can see there. That's the cat. That's the cat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because I love cats. I used to have 3 cats.
Oh, same, same.
Then there's the Eye of yeah. Then I think it's the Eye of Ra, not the Eye of Horus. And my book, Being and Becoming, which I'm hoping to publish next year, looking for a literary
Hmm.
agent at the moment, which is really about the nature of existence and beauty and truth and freedom. So that's called Being and Becoming. So that she painted that. There's a crystal. There's an angel's trumpet flower, which is the most powerful psychedelic on Earth, I think, maybe apart from Bufo. And then I have a flame in my hand, and she wrote 48 BC, which is the date that the Library of Alexandria burned. So
Mm.
that's a little rundown. But yeah, she's called Kim. She's called Kim, and her second name is Mac. So if you're interested, she really is an extraordinary artist, and I think she's going to be huge. So check her out.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yes, please
Shoot me a
do.
link and I'll put that in the show notes. It's beautiful, and whoever's listening to this audio, I recommend hopping over on YouTube and having a look as well. You're missing out otherwise.
Oh, thank you. She'll be delighted.
Arabella, this was really lovely. Thank you so much again for being on the show. Just before we hop off, I want to ask you if people want to find you on the internet and or in real life, where can they do so?
Yeah. So head to my website, www.arabellathais.com. Maybe you could put a link or something. And through there, if they want to find out about any of my teachings, any of my courses, containers, then they can access the Temple of Truth via my website, which is where I kind of that's how I can be accessed, if you will. If you want to be directly taught by me or any of that, is through my School of Consciousness, the Temple of Truth. And other than that, yeah, I do quite a lot of talks, public speaking, academic events, and otherwise. And it's just all on my website, really.
Lovely. Is there anything else we haven't touched on that you want to mention just before we hop off?
Um, Not really. Maybe the only other thing that we didn't talk about so much was Eros. And I could have spoken about that perhaps with regards to matriarchy and that whole thing. But I think this is something that's really, really key to my teachings as well, and is important as part of this archetypal movement back towards the feminine and the feminine power, is that it's really about erotic power. This is integral, is that everything is erotic, everything is embedded with this divine creative energy of ecstasy and delight and creativity. And one of the reasons I push for matriarchy is that we really need to bring this to the forefront, and it is a kind of ecstatic multi-orgasmic energy that if men and women can really unite harmoniously as equal components of a cosmic dance, like we could honestly have an ecstatic utopian situation on Earth. So that's also really important. And that's archetypal, and that corresponds to Aphrodite Urania, which is the archetype of Venus or Aphrodite at like a higher octave, whereby the noetic, so the noetic refers to kind of intellectual endeavor, is infused and embedded with erotic delight. So it's like the mind, the upper chakras and the lower chakras become united. So I didn't really talk about that, but that's really at the heart of this kind of matriarchal paradigm, which I'm pushing for.
Is there anywhere people can go to read more about or listen to more about Eros from your perspective? Any
Um,
talks?
well, yeah, there is actually a seminar I did called Aero Aesthetics where I talk about this. And by the end of the summer, I'm launching a course called Cosmica Erotica, which is
Hmm.
teaching people about this, but also giving them like embodied, like orgasmic praxis to step into like this like cosmic orgasm. It's a big cosmic orgasm if you actually like are able to reach it. Like that's what's going down.
Amazing. What a note to end on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. We'll end on that sort of climactic moment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Arabella. I time has absolutely flied. I know you have to go, so I could have still kept you for 5 more hours, but we're not gonna do that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so generous and giving me this platform to express my ideas, and for being open to listening to my perspective. And it's a real honor. And I think the work you're doing is really incredible. So keep shining your light, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure.